evolution, and particularly to our series of ASMR leftist theories lectures. We are reading Capitalist Realism by Mark Fisher at the moment, and we are continuing today with chapter 6 and 7. I am back home after being away for a while, so we can start reading chapters 2 by 2 again. I had to restart this recording quite a few times because I kept having these sneezing fits, and it's the same old story all day, no sneezing, and then I have to record this and it just starts. I also just watched Morocco lose in the quarterfinals of the African Cup of Nations, so it's a bit sad. I am not for nationalism apart from when it happens in football. Anyhow, a few announcements. There will be new material coming out in the following weeks that is not only ASMR related or in the ASMR format. So we are currently working on interviews with representatives or with people who work in politics in different countries that are not much spoken of at an international level. So I'm not gonna spoil too much of it, but yes, quite exciting new material coming and different formats on this channel. And I just wanted to thank everyone who's been supporting the channel and its growth, and it's really great to see how you guys are enjoying the content that's coming out. So yeah, super cool, makes me happy. Anyhow, without any further ado, let's get started with chapter 6 and 7 today of Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism. And let's pray for no sneezing fits during this reading. Chapter 6. All that is solid melts into PR, market Stalinism and bureaucratic anti-production. Mike Judge's unjustly under-celebrated film Office Space 1999 is as acute an account of the 90s, early 2000s workplace as Schroeder's Blue Collar 1978 was of 70 labor relations. Instead of the confrontation between trade union official and management in a factory, Judge's film shows a corporation sclerotized by administrative anti-production. Workers receive multiple memos from different managers saying the exact same thing. Naturally, the memo concerns a bureaucratic practice. It aims to induce compliance with a new procedure of putting cover sheets on reports. In keeping with the being smart ethos, the management style in Office Space is a mixture of shirt sleeves informality and a quiet authoritarianism. Judge shows this same managerialism presides in the corporate coffee chains where the office workers go to relax. Here, staff are required to decorate their uniforms with 7 pieces of flair, i.e. badges or other personal tokens, to express their individuality and creativity. A handy illustration of the way in which creativity and self-expression have become intrinsic to labor in controlled societies, which, as Paulo Virno, Jan Molière Boutang, and others have pointed out, now makes effective as well as productive demands on workers. Furthermore, the attempt to crudely quantify this effective contribution also tells us a great deal about the new arrangements. The flare example also points to another phenomenon, hidden expectation behind official standards. Joanna, a waitress at the coffee chain, wears exactly 7 pieces of flair, but is made clear to her that even though 7 is officially enough, it is actually inadequate. The manager asks if she wants to look the sort of person who only does the bare minimum. You know what, Stan, if you want me to wear 37 pieces of flair, Joanna complains, why don't you just make the minimum 37 pieces of flair? Well, the manager replies, I thought I remembered you saying that you wanted to express yourself. terms mission statesmen have proliferated even as neoliberal rhetoric about the end of top-down centralized control has gained eminence. It might seem that bureaucracy is a kind of return of the repressed, ironically re-emerging at the heart of a system which has professed to destroy. But the resurgence of bureaucracy in neoliberalism is more than an atavism or an anomaly. As I have already indicated, there is no contradiction between being smart and the increase of administration and regulation. They are two sides of labor in controlled societies. Richard Sennett has argued that the flattering of pyramidal hierarchies has actually led to more surveillance of work. One of the claims made for the new organization of work is that it decentralizes power, that is, gives people in the lower ranks and organization more control over their own activities, Sennett writes. Certainly, this claim is false in terms of the techniques employed for taking apart the old bureaucratic behemoths. The new information system provides a comprehensive picture of the organization to top managers in ways which give individuals anywhere in the network little room to hide. But it is only that information technology has granted manager more access to data. But it isn't only that information. It is the data itself that has proliferated. Much of this information is provided by workers themselves. Massimo De Angelis and David Harvey describe some of the bureaucratic measures with which a lecturer must comply when putting together a module for an undergraduate degree in British University. For each module, De Angelis and Harvey write, the module leader, ML, i.e. lecturer, must complete various paperwork, in particular a module specification at the module start, which lists the module's aim and objectives, ILOs, modes and methods of assessment, amongst other information, and a model review document at the end of the module, in which the ML, the lecturer, reports their own assessment of the module's strengths and weaknesses and their suggested changes for the following year, a summary of students' feedback, and an average marks and their dispersion. This is only the beginning, however. For the degree program as a whole, academic must prepare a program specification as well as producing annual program reports which record student performance according to progression rates, withdrawal rates, location and spread of marks. All students' marks have to be graded against a matrix. This auto-surveillance is complemented by assessment carried out by external authorities. The marking of students' assignment is monitored by external examiners who are supposed to maintain consistency of standards across the university sector. Lecturers have to be observed by their peers, while departments are subject to periodic 3 or 4 day inspections by the Quality Assurance Agency for Higher Education, QAA. If they are research active, lecturers must submit their best for publications every 4 or 5 years to be graded by panel as part of the research assessment exercise, replaced in 2008 by the equally controversial Research Excellence Framework. De Angelis and Harvey are clear that these are only very sketchy account of only some of the bureaucratic tasks that academics have to perform, all of which have funding implications for institutions. This battery of bureaucratic procedures is by no means confined to university nor to education. Other public services such as the National Health Service and the police force find themselves enmeshed in similar bureaucratic metastases. This is in part a consequence of the inherent resistance of certain processes and services to marketization. The supposed marketization of education, for instance, rests on a confused and undeveloped analogy. Are students the consumers of the service or its product? The idealized market was supposed to labors, by their nature, are resistant to quantification, as inevitably require additional layers of management and bureaucracy. What we have is not a direct comparison of workers' performance or output, but a comparison between the audited representation of that performance and output. Inevitably, a short circuiting occurs and work becomes geared toward the generation and messaging of representations rather than to the official goals of the work itself. Indeed, an anthropological study of local government in Britain argues that more effort goes into ensuring that a local authority's services are represented correctly than goes into actually improving those services. This reversal of priorities is one of the hallmarks of a system which can be characterized without hyperbole as market Stalinism. What late capitalism repeats from Stalinism is just this valuing of symbols of achievement over actual remains always leaders. In the example of the White Sea Canal above, for instance, it wasn't Stalin himself who was the representative of the Big Other, so much as the Soviet and foreign writers who had to be persuaded of the glories of the project. One important dimension of the Big Other is that it does not know everything. It is this constitutive ignorance of the Big Other that allows public relations to function. Indeed, the Big Other could be defined as the consumer of PR and propaganda, the virtual figure which is required to believe even when no individual can. To use one of Zizek's example, who was it, for instance, who didn't know that really existing socialism, RES, was shabby and corrupt? Not any of the people who were all too aware of its shortcomings, nor any of the government's administrators, not administrators, who couldn't but know. No, it was the Big Other who was the one deemed not to know, who wasn't allowed to know the quotidian reality of RES. Yet the distinction between what the Big Other knows, i.e. what is officially accepted, and what is widely known and experienced by actual individuals, is very far from being merely emptily formal. It is the discrepancy between the two that allows ordinary social reality to function. When the illusion that the Big Other did not know can no longer be maintained, the incorporeal fabric holding the social system together disintegrates. This is why Khrushchev's speech in 1965, in which we admitted the fallings of the Soviet state, was so momentous. It is not as if anyone in the party was unaware of the atrocities and corruption carried out in its names, but Khrushchev's announcement made it impossible to believe anymore that the Big Other was ignorant of them. So much for real existing socialism, but what of really existing capitalism? One way to understand the realism of capitalist realism is in terms of the claims to have given up beliefs in the Big Other. Postmodernism can be construed as the name for the complex of crisis that the decline in the belief in the Big Other has triggered. As Lyotard's famous formulation of the postmodern condition, incredulity towards meta-narrative, suggests. Jameson, of course, would argue that the incredulity towards meta-narrative is one expression of the cultural logic of late capitalism, a consequence of the switch into the post-Fordist mode of capital accumulation. Nick Land gives one of the most euphoric accounts of the postmodern meltdown of culture into the economy. In Land's work, a cybernetically upgraded invisible hand is progressively eliminating centralized state power. Land 90s text synthesized cybernetics, complexity theory, cyberpunk fiction, and neoliberalism to construct a vision of capital planetary artificial intelligence, a vast splendidly facile system which renders humans will obsolete. In his manifesto for non-linear decentered capital meltdown, Land invokes a massively distributed matrix network tendency oriented to disabling ROM command control programs, sustaining all macro and micro government entities, globally concentrating themselves as the human security system. This is capitalism as a shattering reel in which viral digital signals circulate on self-sustaining network which bypass the symbolic and therefore do not require the Big Other as a guarantor. It is the loose and Guattari's capital as unnameable thing, but without the forces of territorialization and anti-production which they argued were constitutive of capitalism. One of the problems of Land's position is also what is most interesting about it, precisely that it posits a pure capitalism, a capitalism which is only inhibited and blocked by extrinsic rather than internal elements. According to Land's logic, these elements are atavism that will eventually be consumed and metabolized by capital. Yet capitalism cannot be purified in this way. Strip away the forces of anti-production and capitalism disappears with them. Similarly, there is no progressive tendency towards an unsheathing characterized really existing socialism between, on the one hand, an official culture in which capitalist enterprises are presented as socially responsible and caring, and on the other, a widespread awareness that companies are actually corrupt, ruthless, etc. In other words, capitalist postmodernity is not quite as incredulous as it would appear to be, as the jeweler Gerald Ratner famously found to his cost. Ratner precisely tried to circumvent this symbolic and tell it how it is, describing the inexpensive jewelry his shop sold as scrap in an after-dinner speech. But the consequences of Ratner making this judgment official were immediate and serious. 500 million was wiped off the value of the company, and he lost his job. Customers might previously have known that the jewelry Ratner sold was poor quality, but the big other didn't know. As soon as it did, Ratner's collapsed. Vernacular postmodernism has dealt with the crisis of symbolic efficiency in a far less intense way than Nick Land, through metafictional anxieties about the function of the author, and in television programs or films which expose the mechanism of their own production and reflexively incorporate discussion of their own status as commodities. But postmodernism supposed the gestures of demystification do not evince sophistication so as much as a certain naivety, a conviction that there were others in the past who really believed in the symbolic. In fact, of course, symbolic efficiency was achieved precisely by maintaining a clear distinction between a material empirical causality and another incorporeal causality proper to the symbolic. Zizek gives the example of a judge. I know very well that the things are the way I see them, that this person is a corrupted weakling, but I nonetheless treat him respectfully, since he wears the insignia of a judge, so that when he speaks, it is the law itself which speaks through him. However, someone's like drilling in their wall. Wow, I am so lucky. However, postmodernism's cynical reduction to reality falls short. When a judge speaks, there is, in a way, more truth in his words, the words of the institution of law, than in the direct reality of the person, of the judge. If one limits oneself to what one sees, one simply misses the point. Lacan aims at this paradox with his les non-dupes errent. So it's French, les non-dupes errent, those who do not allow themselves to be caught in the symbolic deception fiction, who continue to believe their eyes are the one who err most. A cynic who believes only in his eyes misses the efficiency of the symbolic fiction and how it structures our experience and of reality. Much of Baudrillard's work was a commentary on this same effect, the way in which the abolition of the symbolic led not to a direct encounter with the real, but to a kind of hemorrhaging of the real. For Baudrillard, phenomena such as fly on the wall, the commentaries and political opinion polls, both of which claim to present reality in an unmediated way, would always pose an insoluble dilemma. Did the presence of the camera affect the behavior of those being filmed? Would the publication of poll results affect the behaviors of voters? Such questions were undecidable, and therefore reality would always be elusive. At the very moment when it seemed that it was being grasped in the raw, reality transformed into what Baudrillard, in a much misunderstood neologism, called hyperreality. Uncannily echoing Baudrillard's fixation, the most successful reality television program ended up fusing fly-on-the-wall documentary elements with interactive polling. In effect, there are two levels of reality in these shows: the unscripted behavior of the real-life decide captures perfectly the mode of control by feedback that, according to Baudrillard, has replaced old centralized forms of power. We ourselves occupy the empty seat of power, phoning and clicking in our responses. TV's Big Brother had superseded Orwell's Big Brother. We, the audience, are not subjected to a power that comes from outside. Rather, we are integrated into a control circuit that has our desire and preferences as its only mandate. But those desire and preferences are returned to us, no longer as ours, but as the desire of the big other. Clearly, these circuits are not confined to television. Cybernetic feedback system, focus group, demographic surveys are now integral to the delivery of all services, including education and government. This returns us to the issue of post-Fordist bureaucracy. There is, of course, a close relationship between bureaucracy, the discourse of officialdom, and the big other. Witness two of Zizek's own examples of the big other at work. A low-level official who, having not been informed of a promotion, says, "Sorry, I have not yet been properly informed about this new measure, so I can't help you." A woman who believed that she was suffering bad luck because of the number of her house, who could not be satisfied by simply repeating a different number herself, because it has to be done properly by the responsible state institution. We are all familiar with bureaucratic libido, with the enjoyment that certain officials derive from this position of disavowed responsibility. It's not me, I'm afraid, it's the regulation. The frustration of dealing with bureaucrats often arises because they themselves can make no decision. Rather, they are permitted only to refer to decisions that have already been made by the big other. Kafka was the greatest writer on bureaucracy because he saw that this structure of disavowal was inherent to bureaucracy. The quest to reach the ultimate authority who will finally resolve case official status can never end because the big other cannot be encountered in itself. There are only officials, more or less hostile, engaged in acts of interpretation about what the big other's intentions are. And these acts of interpretation, these deferrals of responsibility, are all that the big other is. If Kafka is valuable as a commentator on totalitarianism, it is by revealing that there was a dimension of totalitarianism which cannot be understood on the model of despotic command. Kafka's purgatorial vision of a bureaucratic labyrinth without end times, which Zizek claims that the Soviet system was an empire of signs in which even the nomenclatura themselves, including Stalin and Molotov, were engaged in interpreting a complex series of social semiotic signals. No one knew what was required. Instead, individuals could only guess what particular gestures or directives meant. What happens in late capitalism, when there is no possibility of appealing, even in principle, to a final authority which can offer the definitive official version, is a massive intensification of that ambiguity. As an example of this syndrome, let us turn once more to further education. At a meeting between trade union official, college principal and members of parliament, the Learning and Skills Council, LSC, the Kwango be superseded by a permanent and obliquitous measurement which cannot help but generalize the same perpetual anxiety. In any case, it is not as if the light inspection is in any sense preferable for staff than the heavy one. The inspectors are in the college for the same amount of time as they were under the old system. The fact that there are fewer of them does nothing to alleviate the stress of the inspection, which has far more to do with the extra bureaucratic window dressing one has to do in anticipation of a possible observation than it has to do with any actual observation itself. The inspection, that is to say, corresponds precisely to Foucault's account of the virtual nature of surveillance in discipline and punish. Foucault famously observes that there is no need for the place of surveillance to actually be occupied. The effect of not knowing whether you will be observed or not produces an introjection of the surveillance apparatus. You constantly act as if you were always about to be observed. Yet, in the case of school and university inspections, what you will be graded on is not primarily your abilities as a teacher, so much as your diligence as a bureaucrat. There are other bizarre effects. Since Ofsted is now observing the college self-assessment system, there is an implicit incentive for the college to grade itself and its teaching lower than it actually deserves. The result is a kind of postmodern capitalist version of Maoist confessionalism, in which workers are required to engage in constant symbolic self-denigration. At one point, when our line manager was extolling the virtues of the new light inspection system, he told us that the problem with our departmental log blocks was that they were not sufficiently self-critical. But don't worry, he urged, any self-criticisms we make are purely symbolic and will never be acted upon, as if performing self-flagellation as part of a purely formal exercise in cynical bureaucratic compliance were any less demoralizing. In the post-40s classroom, the reflexive impotence of the students is mirrored by reflexive impotence of the teachers. De Angelis and Harvey reported that practices and requirements of standardization and surveillance obviously impose a huge burden of work on academics, and few are happy about it. There have been a number of responses. Managers have frequently suggested there is no alternative DINA, and have perhaps suggested that what we need to do is work smarter, not harder. This is a seductive slogan introduced to dampen staff resistance to further changes, which, in our experience, has a devastating effects on working condition, attempts to couple the need for change, restructuring and innovation in order to meet the budget pressure and increase competitiveness, with staff's resistance not only to worsening of their condition of work, but also to the educational and academic meaninglessness of the changes. The invocation of the idea that there is no alternative and the recommendation to work smarter, not harder, shows how capitalist realism sets the tone for labor disputes in post-40ism. Ending the inspection regime, on one lecturer sardonically remarked, seems more impossible than ending slavery was. Such fatalism can only be challenged if a new collective political subject emerges. So, we are already 40 minutes in, so I'm not sure I will be reading chapter 7 at this time, so I'm I am doing it. I am backtracking on my initial promise of reading 2 chapters, but I had forgotten how long this chapter was. If you guys absolutely want this chapter 7 to be read, just let me know, and I can put it out this same week, perhaps a day or 2 after chapter 6, but just to keep the videos shorter, although it's almost 40 minutes, so it's not like that short. We're just gonna stop here for today, and Yeah.